Sure, sure. Yeah, just in a few minutes. I don't know if you had a chance to review my works, see some of the things that I've written, the topics and whatnot, as well as the stuff on my own channel. I have about 700 subscribers. I'm kind of
Nice.
all over the map. I describe myself as politically homeless. I don't know what the hell I am, so I call myself a radical civic nationalist
Hell
because
yeah.
it's a radical departure from the neoliberal market fundamentalist, but I don't dig the tankies and the Nat socks either, because I'm a
Hmm.
strong anti-communist. I'm against authoritarian socialism. But you made one of the points that my co-host and Kurt Herschel Miller and I have made on our show. It's like I have a friend of mine who he took his life. He was a good friend of mine. He was a tankie who left it and then came back. And it's like when I talk to people, I've actually had National Socialist or crypto fascist ask to be interviewed, including some in Florida. And when I talk to them, it's like their critique minus the racial, all the larded up racial bullshit and anti Jewish crap.
Mm.
It's like their critiques are not off on what's going on in American society. But like you, I don't want their solutions imposed in this. It's not like I want an unaccountable fucking government that like is going to be so corrupt and is going to put you and me and my daughter and my girlfriend and others in the camp. You know,
Well,
so
yeah, no, that's actually that it's refreshing to hear, but that's actually exactly been my experience exploring the more extreme political fringes. I've been in like the left wing debate scene for a really long time. And basically, the main thing that I found is that people will nail the descriptions. They'll be like, people, don't have living wages. It takes two incomes in order to make a family work. Everybody's working their ass off. They don't have any benefits. They don't have health care. They don't have dental. They don't have retirement. They have no hopes for these things in the future just because everything is cut down to the bone. It seems like globalization and neoliberal economics has really shafted the middle class and lower class working folk. And basically, you have to work twice as hard to get half as far in the modern economy. And as a result, a lot of people who grew up with a decent standard of living are pretty upset by that, and they're looking for solutions. But then, just like you said, the solutions are trash. It's like revolutionary communism or revolutionary racial separation, because somehow, as soon as we get all the white people away from the black people and the Hispanic people and the Jews, then all of our problems are going to disappear. And it's like, bro, like I don't like I don't understand how that follows necessarily, unless you just assume like white people are just like amazing at everything all of the time, which
mhm.
I think white people are good at things, but I don't think they're amazing at everything all of the time. Like,
Well, I think everybody's individual. I think there's good and bad in every group of people and every social class. I mean, that's been my experience. I mean, I do agree with observers like Chris Hedges, Matt Taibbi on the left, and those on the right that have been critical of this. Not too many these days, at least sincerely, about the archipelago man. The super wealthy archipelago man is what Matt Taibbi referred to, so the likes of Mitt Romney, where they culturally have no country. They don't give a flipping fuck about the survival of the country. And I've written very extensively on this. They say this shit openly. And those people I consider, frankly, my enemies of my country and our future. They don't give a shit about national security and everything. We could talk about this on the show, but that's where I'm coming from. You know, I've been involved with some politics. I worked on the campaign with Lieutenant Colonel Allen West. He proved to be a huge disappointment. I thought he was going to be another kind of Republican. And, he voted wrong on work visas, the three free trade agreements, and permanent normal trade relations with the Russians, even after when he was defeated. And he spoke out against the national security threat of Vladimir Putin's neo KGB Russia. And he still voted for that fucking bill. And apparently he was pressured by leadership. That was one
I
source that I heard.
this is why hold on, I'm gonna grab something. This is
I'm going to grab a cup of wine. I'll be right back. Do you mind if I grab wine? Do
No,
you
please
object?
go ahead. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Yeah, I got my wine and my water.
But I'll say it a little starting late, All right, so Christian Valeris, you were very generous during the donations, but let me kind of say, I back when we were running Clout Weekly, where I was just kind of summarizing the drama of the week or whatever, I was running from 11 to 1 because I wanted to be after Hippy Dippy. But as Hippy Dippy kind of disappeared, and also people have different interview times that are more convenient for them, we've snuck in a little bit earlier and earlier. But the goal eventually is to get back to the 11 to 1 slot, or even run like a new Hippy Dippy in the old Hippy Dippy time slot. But we got so much going on. We got to focus on what we're doing first. We literally, like, dude, I'm sunburnt from today, from doing the chopping up the trees and stuff. So no, but what you were saying, I wanted to address. So this is why I am totally black pilled on like electoral politics, because basically what I think is what happens is, even if let's say hypothetically I wanted to get into electoral politics, I think what happens is you start fundraising, you start calling people, you start working 60-hour weeks, basically getting money for the campaign. You go to speeches where hundreds, if not thousands, of people are listening to what you have to say, and you get lots of applause and claps on the back. And then a bunch of rich and powerful people start rubbing their elbows against you, and they basically say, "You're special. You're important. We're going to get you into the seat so you can help us win." Blah, 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 fucking blah. But then when you actually sit down with them, it's not your agenda. It's not what you want to do. It's whatever the fuck they want to do. And so as a result, you have two options. If you want their support, if you want their money, if you want the support of the mainstream, if you want the Republicans to side with you or the Democrats side with you, it's either bend your agenda to their agenda or get the fuck out. And that's pretty much all. That's what we've seen dozens, hundreds, thousands of times with every politician, no matter how charismatic. They have not been able to bend the will of the establishment to their will, except for maybe Trump. But we even saw how much of his campaign and his ambitions got neutered by the establishment.
Right. Well, and I talk about in my book. I mean, we could start the show if you want and just rehash, but in my book, I talk about Trump revolution betrayed. I voted for Trump in 2020. I was interviewed, if you're familiar with the organization Accuracy in Media and America's Survival with Cliff Kincaid, he has interviewed me a number of times, and we talked about Trump, and I supported him, critiques and all. I mean, he is a nonprofit, so I had to be careful with what I said, but, and obviously he has to have journalistic integrity too. But I was a huge supporter of Trump. I opposed all the other candidates because I thought Trump would be this true radical centrist, what used to be called the Vital Center or Radical Center, or the Schlesinger Jr. And I saw how he was attacked by all the puppets of the Club for Growth and the Tea Party, which is generally globalist, Koch brothers organizations, if you will. And I loved it. I loved it. And the Tea Party did not. I was in Boca Raton when he was at a Tea Party rally in 2011. And a lot of the people I witnessed did not like Trump. They did not like when he said our infrastructure, we need more infrastructure spending. We need to revise our free trade agreements and all the rest of it, that we're becoming a third world country and all these social programs we need. They did not like that. And I'm like, yeah, bitch, you go, you go, you go.
But
I've seen your style, so I know I can curse a little bit on here. And
no,
sometimes
yeah,
I get really
a pretty
lit
profane
on
person.
Well, so it's like, but
I
he
wanna
fucked
tell
us
you,
over on a lot of things. He
well,
fucked us over.
True.
And I wrote a chapter about it.
But what I wanna say to kind of back this up though is, I think I see a generational shift, and I also see some of the propaganda that was working 10 or 20 years ago not working now. So, for instance, like, I think during the 1990s, NAFTA and TPP and globalization is good for all of us, and everything's going to be super cheap, and you're going to be able to do whatever you want, and we'll be able to find you new and better jobs, and blah blah blah. We've basically seen that not really come to fruition. What's happened is everybody shifted to the gig economy. They have to compete with overseas labor. Overseas labor is infinitely more cheap than what we do here. There's no domestic manufacturing. There's no domestic anything really. So your options are, and now especially with the most recent COVID breakdown, we're in what I've heard described as a K economy, where basically what's happened is your wages have skyrocketed because you have a value that you can contribute to the new economy, or your value or your wages have either stagnated or plummeted because you don't have anything to offer the new economy except for to be a warm body to do a job that nobody values. And so so many people are stuck in the stagnated part that I think that's part of the reason why radical politics is taking off, is because there's so many people who are stuck where they just don't see the standard of living of their parents. And then finally, I know I'm ranting, but this is kind of the thing that I want to say.
Good. It's all beautiful stuff. You're preaching my sermon here.
Excellent.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think it's a generational thing with the boomers in particular, because they grew up in a redistributive economic, American system, and they benefited from it. But then in the 1980s, they slashed it, and then they benefited from the economic boom, and then now they don't want from the slashing of the social safety net, and then now they don't want to get taxed while they're on their way out. And it's like, yo, you can't benefit from redistributive economics and then slash it on the back end and then fuck every generation that comes after you. That's just not going to work going forward.
The only thing I would dissent from what you were saying, and I'm 48 years old, I do remember the 1980s. I was born 1974. And, what opened my eyes was I do remember some of it, but I wasn't politically active or interested until the end of the late 1980s. And I started to change my mind by reading Donna McIlvaney, his McIlvaney Intelligence Advisor, the conservative columnist William R. Hawkins and Anthony Horrigan, and they were one of the few critics of Reaganomics. And what had happened is actually for the boomers in the Midwest and in major cities, even parts of New York City and northern New Jersey, which is where I'm from, the greater New York City area, there was a lot of the boomers, the working class, the family farmers were massively fucked by Reagan's financial deregulation and the acceleration of our trade policy. I mean, our free trade policy started with the Reciprocal Trade Acts of Eisenhower, and that started as Senator George Malone, who was one of the good Republicans, wrote a great book called Mainline, and he fought against these free trade treaties, and that's when the industry started to get killed. But it really accelerated in the 1980s, and it was Carter and Reagan and their successors that actually gave money and support through the Commerce Department for maquiladora operations, which are the outsourced industrial plants, those transplant factories. Back in the day, like in our parents' and grandparents' age, you used to call it the runaway plants. And what had happened is that's, what happened, and the country was hollowed out for a long time before. So the boomers got fucked, and there were a lot of boomers that were pissed. I mean, parts of the Midwest, you had like frickin' Lyndon LaRouche's National Labor Caucus of Labor Committees that was actually poised to win elections, gubernatorial election in Illinois. Look it up. And he was pretty extreme, and they're still around. And they're tied in, or were tied in, with some of the tankies, actually, if you follow the tankies like I do. And yeah, it's bad stuff. And the conservatives, I try to tell them that our variant of capitalism is driving people to communism. My late friend Kenny, who was involved with the PSL, Party of Socialism and Liberation in Tampa, he told me, he was involved with another communist group. You know what the party bosses told him? Angelo of the Party of Communist USA. He said, down here in Florida, the propaganda writes itself. All the right to work and laissez-faire politicians, we don't have to do work. They do it themselves. You hear what Ted Cruz is saying about with the student loan forgiveness, with the slacker baristas and all these other people. You hear Ben Shapiro, who I hate, and I don't like him personally. And if you know me, I generally am pretty chill. I like most people, but I don't like him personally. I've never met the guy, but he just oozes asshole. I'm sorry.
I want to cut in a little bit because I think number one, that's actually, so one of the frustrating things with like content creation, I guess, on the right. Like, I think I'm doing okay. Like, my Warhammer 40K stuff is more popular than my political stuff, but the political stuff does okay. And, I've rubbed elbows with some relatively large folks, and I feel like that's good. But the problem is, I kind of feel like it's a microcosm of the probably the electoral political scene, where you can only talk so much shit before you're not going to get onto the panels. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're not going to get onto the shows or the panels or whatever. And but here's what I'm seeing is I'm seeing folks like Steven Crowder, Ben Shapiro, and a few other people basically peddling Koch international, not even internationalist, like globalist free trade, economics, basically reduce taxes. It's not that big of a deal, whatever. And then basically making the argument for Reaganomics 40 years after, it's devastated the country. And I feel like the only reason why they have some level of support is because they continue to use the culture war as a crutch and a sledgehammer to beat to whip up the people in the frenzy, where they're like, well, they're gonna trans your kids, and they're gonna make your kids gay, and they're gonna basically invite the entire third world into America, and they're gonna do this and they're gonna do that. And so what ends up happening is, because you can't go to the fucking left, because the left is however bad the right is, left is insane.
Are we like on air now, by the way?
Oh yeah, we're streaming.
Oh, we are streaming. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say something in response to the gay thing, and it was going to be kind of whatever. But look, my daughter, she came out over a year and a half ago. Am I gay? Look, I have a wonderful girlfriend, so it's like, the culture wars. What's interesting about the culture wars, and what's his name? Kevin Phillips, the architect of the Southern Strategy. He wrote in one of his books I think it was either one of them from the early 1990s. I have it in my library in my office, my bedroom area and my bookshelf. And he talks about, actually, there were documents which showed from the 1980s from like Lee Atwater and other Republican strategists that we can never get the populist vote based on our trickle-down economics. However, the populist vote in this country during the 1980s, they were socially conservative. So let's use that as a wedge. And one of the things I became disillusioned with conservatism on is the fact that it's called fusionism, the sort of Buckley intellectual edifice that was created in the 1950s. It wedded inherently contradictory ideas: laissez-faire liberal economics, cultural conservatism.
Yeah, with social and Christian conservatism. Yeah, it's
and a strong national security. So it's like they want a strong military based on imported parts from trade rivals, as well as outright adversaries like China and even Russia. There's stuff we accepted until recent months. Russia. I mean,
so the genius.
Don't get me started on this. I get really lit about this stuff.
Well, this is what I would say. I was actually talking to a friend even a few hours ago about this. So I think the genius of American commercial empire is that it's worked up until now. Like if you look at like America's allies and cronies and economic interdependence and all that kind of stuff, there's roughly $65 trillion of the roughly like $90 trillion of global economic activity that is either American or under the American hegemony, either through security agreements or trade agreements. What I'm excluding from that is our rivals like China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, all that kind of stuff. That's representative of roughly $20 to $30 trillion worth of economic activity. But the point being that it's cool to be a part, because I view this as the new Rome. It's cool to be a part of Rome and to be a part of like the central hub and the activity and all that kind of stuff. What's not cool is watching it get rotted out from its core and not being able to do anything about it. And that's kind of like the main thing is like, I want to say Cicero in like the year 500, he was like prophesizing the doom of Rome because nobody really cared about like the virtues or the principles or the ideas that built the republic and blah, blah, blah. And he was roughly 300 years before the collapse. But at the same time, I don't see how raw globalism, kind of like what you were saying, an elite class that doesn't care about the nation at all, endless immigration without integration, and constant trade with enemies to our own detriment is I don't see how this is sustainable at all.
No, it's not good. And even our so-called allies during the Cold War and even World War II and the years leading up to World War II have traded with our enemies. I mean, Japan and West Germany were massive violators. I mean, you're not taught in the school that West Germany, since its inception, funded East Germany through the swing credits until literally the dissolution of the old DDR. Um, in my books, and for those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Nevin Gussack. I am the host of the Populist Patriot YouTube channel. We have a little over 700 viewers. I'm also a self-published author, and I wrote a 2-volume book called Turning the Page, My Evolution from Conservatism to Radical Civic Nationalism. And I talk about all these issues that we're talking right now. I mean, you want to talk about black pill, you read that book. It's depressing. Um, you know, and it's just, but it has to be done. Somebody has to write it and somebody has to catalog exactly what's going on. To piggyback on one of your earlier points about the youth, I agree with you. This current generation is starting to put their foot down. We see younger people involved with the strikes, like with Amazon and the JFK warehouse in Staten Island, New York. You have people going on strike in the airports. I think there is this push. The question is and this is probably a very controversial position, but I think it's realistic. The sort of plutocratic globalists, they're not going to give up power. They, through their political allies, they put through, these horrible campaign finance situations, voter suppression, and whatnot. I think it's going to come to a point where it pains me to say this, but realistically, I think we're going to collapse. I think we're headed towards that. And by the way, I'm not for, as George Washington outlined in his brilliant farewell address, I'm not against trade per se, especially with neutrals or friendly countries, based on the quality of the product. I'm not against friendship with other peoples. I'm not trying to virtue signal. I mean, my girlfriend, she's Peruvian. I prefer foods from other countries than even American food. So, and I like traveling abroad too, which I started to do very recently again. So it's not like I'm some, xenophobic individual.
Yeah,
Not.
sheltered bigot
Yeah,
hiding in the
I'm not.
corner. Yeah.
I totally dig other cultures. But my nationalism, unlike National Socialism or xenophobic forms of nationalism or fascist nationalism, unlike those ideologies, my nationalism is all inclusive to a degree, particularly of different people of different races, genders, sexual orientations, social classes, etc. It's predicated on 2 simple principles: shared destiny and national survival. We're in this boat together. And unfortunately, this idea that we're in this together has been eroded. And part of that, yes, is elements of the left, but I really point my finger on the Reaganite right and their allies within the Clinton wing of the Democratic Party. Remember, it was the Clinton, you know what Glass-Steagall is, and I'm sure most of your audience knows what Glass-Steagall was, and that was repealed by this triumvirate, if you will, people like Larry Summers, Bill Clinton, and Phil Gramm, a reactionary libertarian globalist senator from Texas who was basically in the pockets of the banks.
Well, so this is my thing though. Is so I the reason why I think civic nationalism has a potent ability to function is because, like you said, it can be incorporative of multiple peoples into a coherent whole, and they do have to have foundational beliefs. So I extend mine a little bit further, where I believe that there's some things that are distinctly American, and I think they're conceptually articulated within our Constitution as it exists right now. And the freedom of speech and freedom of conscience is obviously codified in the First Amendment, but I think it's like a fundamental principle of our liberal society, and it's one of the bedrock principles that makes America America. I also think that the Second Amendment and the right to self-defense, up to and including and against your own government, where in the Declaration of Independence, for example, they basically said, like, hey, if your government becomes tyrannical, you actually have the right to overthrow it, abolish it, or change it. I think that's revolutionary and not uniquely American, but pretty uniquely American. And then I think the other thing that we do really well is like the Fourth and 14th Amendments, where we basically articulate that we expect the government to serve the people and to follow its own laws. Whereas if you look at a lot of countries, even in South and Central America or in the Middle East and North Africa, these countries don't have that. They don't have the rule of law. It's literally like whether or not you can sneak some money into somebody's pocket in order to get something to function so you can survive for the day. That's the way that they operate. So these things I think are American and worth defending. And I would say if you signed up with these things, it doesn't matter if you're trans or gay or Jewish or black or white or whatever. If you sign up for the two things that you said, national survival, shared destiny, and then you sign up for these three ideas, you're not my enemy. You're my friend. Now, the only problem is that I don't know if you've ever seen the show Arrested Development, but there's a character named Tobias Fumke, and he wears jean shorts under his pants, and it's like a psychological disorder. And he says, you may make fun of me, but there are dozens of us. Dozens. And like he holds up his fist in the middle of like a crowd. But the point being that there's only like 3 dozen people who hold this worldview. And so that's kind of what I feel like sometimes, is that there's only a few dozen people who seem to passionately articulate civic nationalism. Everybody else is running for the extreme tribalist groups.
It's so true. I think you make really good points there. I think nationalism has this bad name because we're taught that nationalism is automatically associated with fascism and National Socialism, and that is not correct. Our nationalism is uniquely American. If I had to choose my favorite individuals, I would say Teddy Roosevelt. There's a lot to learn from him, particularly his speech on the new nationalism. I highly urge people to read through it. George Washington, particularly when you look at his farewell address, and also the American School of Political Economy of people like Abraham Lincoln, as well as Henry Carey and Henry Clay and others. And I think that's a good basis to really reconstruct the American political system. My concern with the Constitution, I think it's a wonderful document. I think the problem is it's subverted. I mean, there are groups on the extreme left. There was a good book on the history of the National Lawyers Guild, which still exists today. It's an association of radical lawyers of the left and Communist Party Front at one point too. And they talked about how they're going to use bourgeois freedoms to overthrow the bourgeoisie and establish a revolution. You clothe yourself in the clothes of constitutionalism to use it against it. It's a very cynical tactic, but it can be effective. It's like what the Nazis did in Germany in the Weimar Republic. They used the weapons of democracy, so to speak, to overthrow democracy and capitalism.
Can I say how frustrating it is that basically that when I hear progressive justices basically making shit up and then reinforcing each other's shit within their own circuits because they know that they're in so for instance, like anything anti-Second Amendment in I think it's the same circuit that does Hawaii and California, they just make shit up and then they build shit on top of shit and then they just keep building shit on top of shit until it's no longer questioned. And like it takes it getting to a conservative Supreme Court for it to be overturned. And it's fucking wild that nobody has said like, hey, this is actually in direct violation of the federal Constitution and the Supremacy Clause. It literally fucking takes forever.
Yeah, but also and you make very good points there. I also, at the same time, take a punch to the right too as well. In the Federalist Society judges, where they have passed Buckley versus ruled on decisions, horrible decisions like Buckley versus Vallejo and Bellotti versus the First City that was the First Bank of Boston, Citizens United, and McCutcheon, which basically says that corporations are people and that copious amounts of money in politics is free speech. And they use the Constitution basically to construct a plutocracy. And frankly, some of our early founders and presidents like Thomas Jefferson and Martin Van Buren warned us against the proliferation of organized money in politics. Even some conservatives like Barry Goldwater inveighed against him. And one of the last few good conservative Republicans that I like in Congress, the late Walter Jones, who was a congressman from North Carolina, he actually joined in efforts with the progressive populists to try and get rid of Citizens United too. And I guess my approach on law and the Constitution, I think there needs to be some reconstructive surgery to it without totally expunging the liberalism, because I agree with Senator Jackson, who served in the Nuremberg tribunals. He said that the Constitution is not meant to be a suicide pact, which is something that President Lincoln has talked about. And I think where I see the corporate neoliberal right, as well as the extreme communist left, and even some of the NatSocs have talked about it, to using liberalism to overthrow liberalism, classical liberalism. You have people that are using the Constitution and the weaknesses inherent in classical liberalism to try and overthrow it. And I think we have to look at the reality. Part of my nationalism is based on, okay, we have to look at the problem for what it is, and we have to deal with it. And sometimes it's going to require us to make uncomfortable decisions and uncomfortable points. I mean, I don't know what you think of that. It's very controversial what I'm saying, I'm sure, but look where we are now.
So I do get it. I guess I'm still a little bit more status quo-y than you. Basically, for my thing is like the extremeness or whatever. So I've heard basically that alternative plans, the U-shaped, like the horseshoe theory, and also using authoritarian politics in order to infiltrate other authoritarian politics. There was actually, I talked to a good chunk of fascist philosophers, Keith Woods and Cultured Thug being two of the smartest ones that I've ever dealt with, and they actually had a conversation where they were like, hey, why don't we pretend to be leftists? Because it seems like if you look at authoritarian China, they pretty much became a fascist state anyways, based off of the things that we would care about, because they have Han supremacy, they have authoritarian control of the economy, they have authoritarian control of the state, they do have the ability to suppress degenerates and this, that, the other. So they basically said, should we go left in order to go full right? And I thought that was super interesting, and I do get that liberalism does have. It's kind of, for me, it's kind of like atheism. It has a lack of structure. It has a lack of definition that almost becomes its own enemy, because it tolerates the people who wish to subvert it. But I also think that's part of its power, where if you trust the Republic and if you trust the Constitution and if you trust liberalism to kind of sustain itself going forward, it actually can survive a lot of the hardships that authoritarian countries can't. So for me, I don't know where the line is for when you actually move out of the liberal status quo into kind of a more aggressive civic nationalist perspective that might violate the rights of other people per an outdated and violated constitution. But I do think we're flirting with that now, and I think that's what's scary to me, is to see so many people ready to throw out 200, 300 years of history and build up for what? What are we going to achieve by destroying this?
That's why, frankly, I'm on air, because I want to provide an alternative to that, because I agree with you. I don't want to become something that I also fight against like you. My concern, one of the many concerns I have about fascism and Marxism, Leninism, is there's no checks and balances. You don't want to throw the baby without the bathwater. I've known people who have lived in communist countries. One of my good friends' grandparents was a Holocaust survivor. I get it. It's not pretty. I don't know if you've met people or dated people or have family that were from communist countries. I will tell you, and it's no disrespect to people that I know that are from communist countries, but it damages you mentally. There's something it takes away from you it does not go away, and it's very sad. So
The
Go
only
ahead.
reason why I want to interject here is because I think it's important. I feel like the younger generation, particularly people who are my age or younger, who identify as communists or socialists in the United States, they totally ignore the history of the 20th century of socialist states because they say that's not the theoretical version of what I'm talking about. That's not the decommodification of basic human need and workers owning the means of production. So that's not socialism. And then also, it's not a moneyless, classless, stateless society. So that's not communism. But what frustrates the ever living shit out of me about that is the fact that it's like, okay, but at the same time, people just like you in these countries overthrew the existing government, became the political power, created a centralized government in order to force everybody into their world vision, and then created some of the most dystopian societies that currently and previously existed. Why do you think that your revolution is going to be different? And oftentimes there, I just get oh, you're bringing up Venezuela and iPhones and capitalism. You're an idiot. And it's like, okay, well, you didn't answer my question, so fuck you.
No,
But
no.
isn't that scary that there's like an
Oh, it
entire
is scary.
generation
I've
of
written
people who
very
don't care about
extensively
any of
about it.
this?
Well, down here in Florida, the Party of Socialism and Liberation in the last presidential election, Gloria La Riva, I think she got like 74,000 votes. And I will say, when the shit hits the fan in this country and we have the collapse because of neoliberalism, deregulation, labor hating, and everything, I will leave, and I've mentioned this on my show before. People say, well, it can't happen here. Well, look, check this out. 91 million people was the population of Russia under the provisional government of Alexander Kerensky in 1917. So only 200,000 Bolsheviks. Yet they managed to overthrow the provisional government. Why? Because you had the corruption, you had a collapsing war front, you had the soldiers that couldn't have the stomach, and Lenin, what did he promise? Peace, land, and bread. And I'm telling you, I've listened to some of the tankies. They're not dumb people. I've never met them in real life, but they're not dumb. I mean, I know there's a lot of personality disputes and this and that.
It's part of the entertainment factor.
It is. It is. It is kind of amusing, actually, to be honest with you. And some of them are really funny, though, and entertaining themselves. But look, I wouldn't want to be governed by them. And they're looking to exploit what's going on. And China and Russia, they do play a role in encouraging this in the United States. I am of the opinion, and I extensively discuss this in my book, on my show, that the Cold War has never ended, that, as I mentioned to you in some private correspondence, that the bear went into hibernation. And when you look at the defectors from Russia who served in the FSB, the SVR, the Russian military, Igor Shafid, Sergei Tretiakov, Colonel Stanislav Lunev. One of my guests and friends, who I don't always agree with him on various issues, J.R. Nyquist, he's met these defectors since the 1990s, and he talks about Russia and China. He knows people, and it's a different world. The policymakers of Moscow and Beijing and their allies. He interviewed Hugo Chavez's personal pilot after he defected. I mean, these governments want our throats. And what they're very good at is co-opting legitimate as well as illegitimate dissent in Western countries, including the United States. They kind of needle you, kind of like a kid. I know you're a father. I'm a dad too. It's like a kid. They're trying to go for the pressure points. Okay, so big business and the conservatives, they're materialists, they're greedy, they think of money. The old private sector oligarchs, we're going to go after the greed and we're going to exploit them. Oh, Vladimir Putin. Oh, Pat Buchanan. Oh, I'm going to portray myself as this Christian and this nationalist and everything, and, work the Russian Orthodox Church and do influence operations like that. Oh, my God. We've got this whole anti-imperialist thing in the United States, Medea Benjamin and Code Pink and the various tanky parties and so-called peace groups. Well, we're going to use them, because we don't like war. I don't like war.
Yeah, and I think you saw that in particular with Russia Today propaganda, where it wasn't anti-Russian or anti-Ukrainian; it was neutral. It was, oh, we shouldn't be involved because we need to be neutral. Don't you want to avoid war? Don't you want to avoid war with a nuclear power? Like, it was never. They never said, like, oh, we need to be against Russia or against Ukraine or for Ukraine. It was always about neutrality, and of course neutrality playing into Russia's hands. And so one of the things that what you were talking about kind of brought into my mind, we had somebody asking this, but they were asking, why do civic nationalism? Like, why even bother with this outdated concept of nationalism? And for me, this is my answer: is power abhors a vacuum. And right now, we're in direct competition with ethno-nationalist, theocratic, not like separating these out. Ethno-nationalist countries, theocratic countries, authoritarian socialist countries. Even if you want to say they're not real socialists, you could say they're state capitalists. I don't really care, but they're authoritarian dictatorships. We're in competition with these different countries for the soul of the world. And so if you just have this very laissez-faire, isolationist, liberal, globalist, transnational, whatever, that's not a coherent enough of a philosophy to fight these competing visions for the world. And I think that you would ultimately lose against these competing visions of the world, because they would have a unified version of the world that they could organize their people around. Whereas liberalism, no offense to all the liberals, it's very wishy-washy. It's very, very go with the flow.
Well, yeah, liberalism, classical liberalism, it lacks a strategic perspective. It's all about self-gratification, particularly in a capitalistic, laissez-faire capitalistic formation, and that's the problem. If you ever talk with libertarians or supply-side trickle-down economic proponents, most of them are for trade with our enemies. They tend to be very defensive about it. I've seen it on YouTube. I've read it in the essays. They're in denial about Russia and China generally being a threat to the United States, and they hailed the deindustrialization of the United States. I always said, if we were had our economy based on Walmart and Wall Street during World War II, we'd be living like Man in the High Castle. If you know the book by Philip K. Dick, we'd be fucked, and I'd be dead, long dead. And probably.
But I think I think that the times demand the response, basically. Like so, for instance, like, I think part of the reason why the boomers were willing to take a hatchet to the social safety net is because they lived in such a it was like breathing air or swimming in water for a fish. They just assumed that the level of material wealth that they had was just going to perpetuate itself into the future regardless of what they did. And so they took a hatchet to the social safety net. Now we look at the society we have now and we're like, what the hell? And trying to fight to get back to even getting schizophrenic homeless people off the street and into either a hospital or a public service, that is outside of the question because it costs too much money.
Exactly.
Using mass incarceration as a solution to shitty schools. Yeah, okay, like mass incarceration is bad or jail is bad, but don't raise my taxes for better schooling for kids. And so this is where I think this has nothing to do with philosophical conservatism. I think this has nothing to do with Edmund Burke or trying to create a healthy, happy society in which there's healthy, happy families that are functioning. I think this has to do with a bunch of rich dickheads 40 to 50 years ago coming up with a perfect level of propaganda to get working class and middle class people to vote against creating a healthy, happy society as long as it cuts taxes for the rich, and they can hope to have some piece of the pie once the money comes down the pipe. And
that's very true. That's very true.
I think it's falling apart.
Yeah, let me interject here. And this is where some commentators on the populist progressive left, who are not Marxist-Leninists, in my opinion, are really good. Like Tom Hartman has spoken out against this for years and years. And I think he's dead on. He's written books about this. Nancy McLean, who's written about the Koch network, Jane Mayer. I have written about this in my books too as well, particularly Turning the Page. There's also a book I wrote on the national security dimension called Sowing the Seeds of Destruction, Useful Idiots on the Right, which talks about how these, quote, rich billionaire, multimillionaires that are all concerned about the money, how they support trade with Russia, the old Soviet Union, China, and et cetera. So yeah, it's basically greed that is meeting this idea of statelessness. Thomas Jefferson warned us against these individuals. He wrote in a letter, correspondence letter. He wrote about merchants have no country. They only care about the wares that they sell. I'm butchering his quote, but that's essentially what he said. And I think you're right. I think these are people that are greedy. I remember, and I published this in my last book, there was a dentist in Pennsylvania. He said, I think his name is Thorberg is his last name or whatever. And he said, the only reason why he said, I would vote for Satan only if my taxes are lower. And you had I was involved with an organization called the Coalition for a Prosperous America briefly, which is really in the forefront in revising our bad free trade policies. And I screened a film that was directed, produced by Peter Navarro and Greg Autry, who are two economists who are nationalists. They're very anti-communist. Navarro later worked for Trump. And there was a message that was given to different Tea Party groups. I had lived in Palm Beach County. And the people that came by, I'm telling you, bro, they were awful. There was one guy, and I'm going to say his name because I don't give a flying fuck, because he was awful. He was the mayor of Tequesta, Tom Paterno. He refused to log in his name. He said he came up and he's like, I've done well and I'm rich basically, and I'm involved in politics and I do it because I want to do the right thing. But you know something? It's those unions in the 1980s, and I'm from Pennsylvania, that wrecked the country. And you know what? All these people, they wrecked the steel industry. And you know what? If you want younger people and people all our age, they got to hustle and they need to do what they need to do and work even harder. And it's this whole trope of laziness. And I think what these people are, I looked him up later and did things, and I mentioned him in my book. He really pissed me off. Those people trigger me. Those greed heads trigger me to no end.
I actually, so I have a question that might cut a little deep, but I think I've heard you mention it a few times, and also I think it's interesting because dealing with Nat Sox, for instance, I think they would bring up these talking points. So did you, correct me if I'm wrong, but did you mention that basically your heritage is Jewish, and basically like that you would have been wiped out if World War II had come to?
Oh yeah, I'm Jewish. I'm born Jewish. I'm somewhat observant, but not super observant.
Well, so my follow-up question is, a lot of the Nat Sox, they basically accuse Jewish people as a whole of being kind of like you mentioned, like merchants with no home and all that kind of stuff. So what draws you to American civic nationalism in particular, where you're like, this is my country, this is my place, these are the people that I want to identify with, I want to share my destiny with them? What is the core that's driving you towards that solution?
Well, it's my home. This is all I've known. It's my home. This is where I raised. I know there are country or governments that seek the overthrow and displacement of the United States. And I think it's just natural for average people to have an attachment to their home country and the neighborhoods and communities that they grew up. This is absorb American culture to some degree. It's normal. It's like the Jews who became integrated in Germany during World War I, who are soldiers and officers who fought. There are good Jews in this country that are nationalists. You look at Alan Tonelson, who was a blog reality check, who was at the NatCon conference down in Miami. You look at Aaron Feuerstein, who is a big business person, textile magnate from Boston. He was an economic nationalist. He was an Orthodox Jew. You get Diana West, who's an anti-communist, an old right nationalist Republican. You get all these people. I mean, and I try to explain. I talk to fascists offline. And I mean, I tell them I'm Jewish. I'm not going to hide it. I'm not ashamed. I'm not going to bullshit them. But, there's nothing in my DNA that, quote, I'm Jewish and my religion and my heritage that automatically programs my brain to be some libertarian, globalist, free market person. I'm sorry.
No. It's beautiful because like this is my frustration is like I even saved a video that I want to react to. They were talking about the military and how it was like a synthetic organism where basically people of all different walks of life were forced together, and as a result of being forced together, they all identified as like brothers and sisters and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, we're talking about people from all over the world. I mean, like I literally, when I went to the schoolhouse, I went with like a Malaysian guy. I went with a white guy from Boston. I went with like, Caribbean black folk, people from New York and New Jersey, Texan black folk, and then obviously shitloads of Hispanics because there's shitloads of Hispanics who are joining the military at this point because I think they're viewing it as their rite of passage to defend their country. And so I served with all kinds of people, and we loved each other like brothers because we were forced into shared destiny. We were forced into a share of certain values, and we were forced into a threat of our shared destiny. So that kind of drove us together. And this video was talking about how it's synthetic and it's fake and it's not possible in America. And I think it's just such bullshit because as long as you share those core values or whatever, like we share the same project, which is health, happiness, being able to raise a family, have a decent life, and then basically perpetuate that on for the next generation. And if you don't identify with that, if you are not even a transnationalist, if you're a fucking globalist who just wants to vampirize a population for your own profit, then fuck you, and you're an enemy basically, which sucks. Because I think that because of the wealth and power that's accumulated through that vampirization, they end up so often in positions of power. Like, I don't even know how to fight those kind of people.
Yeah, it's hard, and that's why I do what I do. I decided long ago I can't do it in the two-party political system. I mean, so I just do my own thing. As you talk about military people, at one of I'm a library manager now. At the previous library that I managed, we had Broward sheriff's officers, police officers, and they were also many of whom are ex-military. We used to always have the best conversations about politics and everything. And they encouraged me. They're like, Nevin, what are you doing? You need to get out there. You need to write. You need to do this, get on air and stuff like that. I've had families said that. So that's why I do what I got to do. You got to be creative and get your voice out there. And thank God for the internet. And one of the things I propose in my book, it is kind of controversial. I know that it will totally trigger and piss off the libertarian Republicans and the Reaganites and everything, and probably parts of the left too, because they would view it as fascist, explicitly fascist. And fascists have done this, unfortunately, but it weirdly kind of worked. And that is a form of national service, like a course at high school where you could choose be military support within this country or build homeless shelters or whatever, but you get the black kids, the poor kids, the rich kids. It's a mandatory thing. You get them together. They sleep together, not literally, of course.
Yeah. But they're dormitories
but
or buildings.
You get to work together as human beings. And I know the Ben Sparrow will be like, oh my God, you're collectivistic or you're a Nazi or whatever. Okay. The country is burning slowly, Ben. You talk about it along with your other colleagues. Part of the problem in this country is we don't think of ourselves as brothers and sisters anymore. We used to think that in this country.
Well,
some of my boomer relatives talk about that when I discuss these issues.
Well, no, and so for me, I think I think the main thing, or there's like constitutional challenges to that, personal liberty challenges, all that kind of stuff. But if I was dictator for a day, I would absolutely. I kind of joke about it. It's like 2 years of the Peace Corps or the Marine Corps. Like that's it. You know, two years
Hmm.
Peace Corps, Marine Corps, or retail and restaurant. Because frankly, I think that retail and restaurant, you know, that's pretty much like hardcore service right there. But
It's
but
true.
the point being that if I was dictator for a day, I would be completely okay with that. But barring that, what I'm trying to do is I'm also trying to encourage conservatives or right wing people to get back into education, to get back into the public schools. Because basically, what we've done is we've conceded public education completely culturally. And not just that, but that is a 15-year developmental cycle, or I mean, I guess it's a little bit less than that, 12 years, and then 4 years for college, I guess. So it's a 12 to 16-year developmental cycle where you can teach kids to treat each other like co-citizens, to care about each other, to share in the destiny of the future of the country, to acknowledge all the fucked up things that we've done, but also to acknowledge all the great things that we've done, and also
Exactly.
to try to create a great future for everyone. And you know, if you don't have that, unfortunately, what I'm seeing coming out of education and coming out of progressive circles is not a shared future destiny. It's an attempt to get America to atone for its sins by self-flagellating on the world stage. And I'm horrified and disgusted, and I get the impulse because we have a long list of sins, but I don't think you create a coherent, cohesive, future-based society by doing whatever the fuck we're doing right now.
Right, and I agree with you. It's like this is where I separate myself from the right and the left. I think we have to, and I was a history and political science major uh, from an undergraduate school,
Mm.
State University of New York at Albany. So I get it. You have to talk about the sins of your country, but it has to be constructed in such a way, supported by government policy at all levels to move forward, to progress forward, to put
Mm.
it in such a way that you're building up the country, not using it to burn down the country.
Which is
And
what we're seeing now. Oh my God, I want to
well,
rip out
it's
my
in the
own toenails.
textbooks. It's in private schools and public schools. I mean, I don't want to hijack your show, but I have a bunch of questions for you, to be honest, because I mean, you make a
No, go
lot
ahead.
of fascinating points and you're very, very thoughtful. And that's why I wanted to reach out to you and have this discussion and maybe future discussions,
Of
perhaps.
course.
Um, what Oh God, I got a million questions, but I guess
Mm.
the biggest one is what propelled you along this path? I mean, did you start out as I started out as a run-of-the-mill Reagan. I became a John Birch Society member and then kind of continued the libertarian path. And
Mhm.
then I started to change in 2008. But where were you when you first got interested in politics, and what caused you to move towards positions that are very similar to me?
Yeah, so I'll give you the detour. So both my grandparents fought in World War II, and my parents are Christian pacifists. So I was
Hmm.
already raised with this contradiction within my own household, where I was raised to basically always turn the other cheek up into the point of death. But I was valorizing by watching World War II movies and history and all that kind of stuff, a justified war that my grandparents had participated in. So I couldn't square these two ideas. And also, as a young man, I got to travel into Europe, and I got to see like the battlefields and the microfiche, and people with horrific wounds, and hundreds of thousands and millions of dead. And what I realized was my grandpa, who I hung out with and who I knew, this wasn't a film to him. This wasn't entertainment. This wasn't a movie. This was real. And since this was real, I wanted to understand why the world could be this fucked up. And of course, social sciences, politics, all that kind of stuff is where you're going to find the conversations about power and violence and war and great personalities and charisma and speeches. So I was drawn to that as a child, and then I would say I've been libertarian a majority of my life, basically saying like
Mhm.
the government should be as small as possible, and we should all leave each other alone to pursue our own destinies. But what ended up happening was I was noticing that people aren't leaving each other the fuck alone. and, and
Yeah.
and so basically what ends up happening is the people who control government and society are the people who won't leave people the fuck alone. So there's two options here. Either you retreat from society and you become like an anarcho-capitalist or a libertarian who just tries to participate in society as minimally as possible, or you say, fuck you, I'm going to seize the reins of power and I'm going to try to implement my version of the world. And I just happen to think that civic nationalist, liberal in structure, but maybe socially not socially conservative, but conservative on a personal level, like individual responsibility, sacrifice for the greater goal, all that kind of stuff. It just seems to me that all of that stuff is correct, and that's kind of why I advocate for what I advocate for.
Interesting. Yeah, very, very interesting. Um, and one of the other questions I had that came to mind is, and I guess it's just a discussion point for both of us,
Mm-hmm.
is how are we going to look? Both I live in Florida, you know, so how would we convince the Republican Party in this state, which is controlled by a governor and a legislature that's controlled by ALEC and big corporations, the Koch network? I mean, Governor DeSantis, I mean, there are some things I agree with, but I have violent disagreement with him on a whole host of issues.
Mm-hmm.
When he was in Congress, he was a creature of the Freedom Caucus, which is generally very libertarian with only a few exceptions. I think he even voted to give President Obama a fast track trade authority back in the day when he was in Congress. How are you going to convince these people that hate labor unions, that are against? I mean, I've come around on this the past several years on Medicare for all. I like to call it Americare. How are you going to convince these people? I mean, I will say one way to do it is, and I think it depends on the intellectual honesty of the people that you're trying to reach, is to try and outflank conservatives on their own ground by
Yep.
showing the intellectual contradictions of fusionism, Reaganism, b, and one of the things, I mean, I don't know if it's bad manners if I bring up another YouTuber on here, but
No,
I think
please.
he had a brilliant point, Kyle Kalinske. On certain points, he really hits home and is really based on certain things. And he talks about how conservative goals can be reached by progressive politics with the
Yes.
highway. And I think he is totally based on that. I kind of have some issues with him on foreign policy. You know, if you listen to him, he his views were formulated on foreign policy by Noam Chomsky's, and there are some severe disagreements I have on that front. But when it comes to certain domestic economic and political structural issues, I think he is right on. And I think what we need to do is, and there is research to prove it, and I talk about it in Turning the Page, my last 2-volume book that's available on Amazon. And I can send you personally if you want a copy at no charge. I think it'll
Sure.
be very black pilling experience.
Uh-oh.
Um, these sort of progressive yet non-socialist yet pro-capitalist policies actually encourages the growth of families, the nuclear family, the single breadwinner. It increases national security. By 1960, as I point out in my show and in my books, by 1960, the Communist Party in the United States and the ultra left, their appeal on economics was pretty much gone because the country was progressing forward on economics and also eventually on civil rights too as well. And you know, that completely collapsed by the 1980s, really and truly. And then we had this idea that the Cold War ended. Now, there's a very good article written by Professor Dominic Tierney. It's in one of the well-known schools in Pennsylvania. I forget which university. And he talked about a gentleman by the name of Georgy Arbatov, who was a top-level official in the Soviet Communist Party's international department and a right-hand person of Gorbachev. And he worked in the United States with this KGB organization front called the Institute for USA and Canada. He studied the American elites and culture. And he talked about how in 1988, and I know people who have witnessed his speeches in the United States, he's spoken about this, Georgy Arbatov. He said, we're going to eliminate the image of the enemy. Now, Gorbachev was still committed to global communism. He was a strategic Leninist when you really peel back the onion layers here.
You asked me a question, and I don't want to lose it just because.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I wanna hear this, but I also want to answer your question before I lose it.
Yeah,
you were kind of asking me, how do we convince the Republicans to kind of break away from this, or conservatives to break away from where they're currently at and maybe go for some more progressive stuff, or to go for things that make sense for the country that are communitarian rather than rawly individualist in a libertarian sense. And I think that you have to break apart kind of like what you were saying, the fusionism with the internal contradictions. And I think that you can, for instance, like one of the main things that I talk about is stewardship. It's in the beginning of the Bible, it's in Genesis, and I think a lot of Christians, conservatism used to have an environmental wing. If you're talking about Teddy Roosevelt, or if you're talking about Richard Nixon with the creation of the EPA, all that kind of stuff, we used to care about the environment. We used to care about having hunting spaces and green spaces for our people to explore and appreciate God and nature and all that kind of stuff. And I think you have to basically force that onto Christian conservatives and say, hey, these fucking, these raw, laissez-faire capitalists, they basically want to butcher every public space that's available for whatever dime they can scrounge out of it. And also these economic elites, they also will butcher anything as long as it gets them a dime. So, you basically have to flip that conversation on its head for economic stewardship. Or environmental stewardship. And I think you can just keep looking for those contradictions. And like you said, you could even use progressivism to achieve conservative goals. A conservative goal that you mentioned that I strongly identify with is strong families. Listen, I don't give a shit if a parent, or if like a kid is being raised by grandma and grandpa, or grandma, grandpa, and mom. But if they can't pay their bills, put their kid in a decent school, and that kid doesn't have a shot at a good job, we're fucked. And to pretend anything different, I think, is raw cope. But I'll leave it there. And you were kind of telling me about the gentleman who came over who was explaining the
how to split the enemy. I mean, basically to take away the image of the enemy. And Dominic Tierney, Professor Tierney, wrote in his essay, it actually worked, because we thought the Cold War ended in 1991. I would argue it didn't. And what happened? Our country became a rudderless nation too, as well. And we can talk about that as well, where again, we're unified as a country when there's a common enemy. But when you take away this image of the enemy, even though you have the enemy still exists, you're going to have a lot of mileage in this country, and the country is going to become disunited. I know that's a tangent, but it's a very important point. The other point I wanted to kind of make, and I wanted to hear your opinion on this too. And you alluded to this earlier a little bit. There are traditional conservatives, take Russell Kirk, that spoke out against a lot of this, by the way. A lot of this, and he was kind of a fusionist, but there was an essay that was actually a speech. It was published on I think it might have been, I forget where it was published. It might have been the Heritage Foundation, ironically. And he talked about how basically the political currents he really didn't like, and one of which was the people that wanted to privatize everything, including the national parks. He said that, another political opinion that he really thought was not good for the country and conservatism was that the notion that corporations can't do wrong, can never do wrong, or that the market should be the test for everything. And I think one of the ways that we can reach the more intellectually honest conservatives, average conservatives, is quote conservatives that go against the libertarian and the Reaganite economic and political agenda. And I do that a lot in my writings. And it's fascinating. And I'm wondering, have you come across those types of conservative perspectives that's
No.
like, holy shit?
Of course not. And the reason why, so this is the thing, is like, we were talking about like political polarization earlier. People talk like Pat Buchanan. You know what I'm saying? Where it's like raw isolationism. I think I read the first half of A Republic, Not an Empire. And like I could understand like all of his complaints, but at the same time I felt like he was jerking way too far back into what basically amounts to isolationism. And so I think that centrism, as much as I am a centrist, the problem with it is when you're only trying to adjust the status quo by degrees rather than revolutionarily destroy something, people tune out because it's not sexy enough. So I think the only way to like get civic nationalist, centrist, common sense incrementalism is basically to have a coherent vision for what you want for the country and then to present it exclusively to lunatics. And by that, I mean like go after like tankies and MLs and anarchists and libertarians and fascists and all that kind of stuff. That way, it's a sexy conversation because you're talking to a political lunatic, but you're actually getting something that could be a coherent vision for the future of the world, and it feels in conflict because you're fighting the fanatic, but in reality, the vision that you're presenting is infinitely more achievable than whatever the fanatic is presenting. Also, another thing that's like a marketing strategy. The other thing that I'm curious about that I want to do, the Forward Party. It probably is a money laundering organization for a bunch of fucking tech bros in order to, just throw some political weight around. But I think the idea of building something bipartisan could actually become like a caucus within each one of the major parties. And you could have forward Republicans and forward Democrats who basically adopt some level of centrist compromise in order to move the country forward. And you could kind of identify where people agree, whether it's like immigration or like research and development or better funding for schools or whatever. And then that way we could build basically a tri-party structure where we have a bunch of moderates who come together for legislation, and then we have the wings fighting each other all the time. And I've been ranting a lot, so I'll leave it there.
No. Keep on going. I need a break, anyways. So it's all good. I do play. Look, you and I do this, and all of the YouTube hosts, like you and I, we love to rant. We get it. We have passion. So it's all forgivable. But no, I think that's a great idea. Now, when we talk about centrists, and I say this to the audience, we don't mean bullshit centrists like Bill Clinton and Joe Biden to agree, or Joe Manchin. Those are not centrists. They are they're advocates of Reaganism light in many ways. But I agree with you. I would like to see those caucuses do exist in the Congress. I would like to see a sort of populist caucus in Congress. And the reason why, and you and I, we had some discussion offline about populism, and I totally understand.
I'm very distrustful of the masses. I understand that's where you get political power, but for me, I'm very, very distrustful.
And I want to make it very clear, there is destructive populism and there's legitimate populism. The populism I support is something like the positive aspects in the New Deal of Franklin Roosevelt, the populism of a Teddy Roosevelt. The reason why I call myself a populist, and I would like to see a populist caucus, is because we've seen how the economic and political elites have fucked over this country, fucked it up the ass, pardon my language. That's how bad it did. And I am not anti-LGBT or anti-homosexual or anything, but it's just, I'm trying to conjure up an image here, a vivid image. And so we need to rebalance things. Everything has gone so far to the private sector oligarchs and the employer class. We need to rebalance that. And for marketing sakes, most people who are politically literate can understand, oh, I'm a populist. They understand what you're saying. And that's what I would be described. There needs to be a better balance between labor and management and the investor class, and there needs to be brakes put on excessive financial speculation to the detriment of legitimate industrial capitalism. With that, I say there is also highly destructive populism. There's pseudo populism. I would consider Trump a pseudo or fake or faux populist. Uh, Look, National Socialists, fascists, they consider themselves populists. They had populist platforms. Even some of the tankies, like Haas of Infrared, for example, he openly says he's a populist. I mean, in my opinion, he's using more populism and good old-fashioned American populism and legitimate concerns about issues to push forward a Marxist-Leninist agenda, which I oppose. So I'm totally in agreement with you. I would like to see a populist caucus that would rebalance relations within the various economic sectors and uphold national security.
And
I
I.
would like,
Mhm.
go ahead.
Oh,
Go
well,
ahead.
I was going to say somebody, K. Roberts has a black pill comment, but I want to address it because I think he actually highlights the next step.
Hmm.
So he says it's lost at the national level. It's now a lead or silver cosmopolitan world. Only the local level can compromise to cooperate upward. So I kind of agree with this because I think that there are powerful technologies that are coming out right now that could increase the power of populism or political organization or union efforts or anything like that. Discord being one of them, where Discord is basically you can create these rooms of voice chats and text chats for people all over the country or regional. You can create tags and factional organizations and all that kind of stuff. And I think that this is one of the most powerful technologies that's been created for social media recently. And I think that while everybody's decrying technology, I think we need to create like a digital, real life hybrid world where you're not using the digital world in order to get sucked into an escapist universe that has no impact on the material world. You actually use the digital world in order to impact the material world, and the material world in order to impact the digital world. And I think within that lies tremendous political opportunity. For instance, organizing unions, even when they're trying to union bust, or
Hmm.
organizing mutual aid, even when it's hard to do so and a majority of your members are poor. Organizing fundraisers and charities and all these kinds of things because, frankly, I think that the lead or silver cosmopolitan elite, no matter who gets elected, they will either bend you or break you while you're trying to change the system. So we can send up like electoral representatives who represent us as best as possible. But I also think that anarchists and libertarians talk about parallel structures. I'll wrap this up in a second. They talk about parallel structures where they want to take money and power away from the government by operating legally, but outside of the government. I think we have to stop talking about that shit and we just need to do it
Yeah.
because this isn't working.
I agree. I think the comment by Kay Roberts, I think is I totally agree with. I think realistically, it has to be local because we can't compete, as you were alluding to, with the big money interests. So I think if we start local in our communities with education efforts, I think that's good. I think you mentioned the technology like Discord, like YouTube. I use YouTube, for example. Everybody has their own unique skill sets and you have to participate. Some people are born organizers and can go into communities and stir up shit. God bless you. You got the job. That's what you do. God bless. Other people, like you and I, we can talk up a storm and talk about this shit until the cows come home to roost. That's our thing. Other people can write books and sell them on Amazon, or write essays. I plan on eventually having a Substack paid subscription newsletter. That's something I always enjoy. I like to research and read all this obscure shit. And and everybody has to do their part, do their skill sets. I think it has to be local, and I think we have to use technology and we build local contacts. And even stuff like even if family members who are reasonable, talk to them, educate them. If you feel comfortable with a particular coworker, and as long as you're talking about certain issues like economics, national security, talk to them. It's as simple as that. Rome wasn't built in a day, as the old expression goes.
Well, and that's there's some people in chat who are kind of doubting what you can really do with a parallel structure, and like I agree that it's going to start small, but even this past week, basically something that I want to talk to my chat about in a minute, and show them some videos and some pictures. Last Sunday, we did a fundraiser. We raised roughly $2,400 for hurricane relief, and then using that money, we bought $1,800 worth of equipment. And then we probably did over the course of the week with between 3 and 10 volunteers per day. We probably had about $10,000 of economic impact by hauling debris, chopping up trees, drying out buildings, running fans, disaster relief, direct food aid, like all that kind of stuff. So I get that, like, I haven't fixed the state of Florida by having a $10,000 economic impact. But at the same time, that's $10,000 of economic activity that helped out people who needed it that wasn't there before. So if you talk about, if I'm just one asshole with 28,000 subs, that only 3,000 to 5,000 people actively watch the fucking politics shit and everybody else is there for Warhammer. If I can do that in a week, what could we do on a long-term scale? And so that's kind of where I want to white pill some of these fucking people who think that, like, we can either let the system collapse because everything's so terrible, or we can revolutionarily destroy everything and start from scratch. And those are the only two options. I don't think those are the only two options at all.
Where do you see this country in about 20 years?
Actually, I say this. If we're in the same racial and economic position that we are today, I will view that as a cultural failure. If we haven't figured out a balance between capital and labor, if we haven't figured out a way to negotiate a future in this country as different races, if we haven't figured out how to come back together as a unified society in the next 20 years, I think we'll have failed.
And what do you see the failure? What do you see result of the failure? What do you see? What kind of government do you see arising? What do you see?
I see a flip flop between the far left and the far right. That's what I see over and over and over again. I think that we would have Bernie and AOC style characters running on the left, and I think we would have Nick Fuentes and Trump style characters running on the right. And they would just blame each other for each other's problems. And basically what would happen is they would just high-five each other on the way in and out of office as the working class and middle class continue to suffer. I basically think that it would be a Latin American country. That's exactly what I think it would be. It would be, Chile or Argentina or Brazil, where your options are the far left or the far right, and that's it.
Well, yeah, Brazil, definitely. I'm not a fan of either candidate, Jair Bolsonaro or Lula da Silva.
Right. Imagine having to make that choice. That's what's coming if we don't get our shit together.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think, if you don't mind me asking, what do you think of Bernie? Do you think Bernie has those good points that he makes? I mean, I've argued that there's some things I vigorously disagreed with back in the 70s and 80s when he was mayor of Burlington. But do you see that he's kind of moderated a bit? Do you feel that he makes a lot of good points?
I do see that he's moderated a bit, but I also wonder if he's hiding power level. That's
one could never know.
Well, right, and that's kind of my fear with a further left figure like Bernie or AOC or whatever, is their agenda and what they think will get them elected is two different things. But like there are things that I think could achieve conservative or right-wing goals that are left-wing. So I think better access to either secondary education or trade schools would be an amazing thing. I think that access to early childhood education would be an amazing thing. I think making sure that our K through 12 system isn't broken would be an amazing thing. I think that healthcare, actually Andrew Yang made one of the most compelling healthcare arguments that I've ever heard, is he's basically arguing that private healthcare is a weighted block around the neck of the American economy, where everybody has to be so worried about the administrative costs and, you know, having HR reps to handle this, that, the other thing, and changing plans and providers. All of this is just administrative bullshit, so administrators behind the scenes can make dickloads of money. Whereas if you actually had like a multi-payer system like Canada or Germany or whatever, then this would reduce administrative costs and also make it so the economy could function. And also, it would free up entrepreneurs, because one of the main reasons why people don't jump into business or jump into different jobs is because of their fears of losing healthcare. So he basically makes a pretty powerful economic argument that actually a multi-payer European style system, despite its flaws, would be better.
Oh, sure. I mean, because half of the bankruptcies, for example, in the United States was a result from medical debt, and it's like that for years. Yeah. I mean, it's just, yeah, the private insurance company, I've dealt with this personally. The biggest problem with private insurance and a lot of American capitalism in its current iteration is everything is modeled on shareholder supremacy, and that usually means majority shareholder. And what's good for the majority shareholders is not necessarily good for the customer. And that's something, as a little historical background, I'm sure you know this already, was a development of people like Milton Friedman and Theodore Levitt and others, and it has gotten out of control. And Jensen is his last name, I forget his first name.
Yeah. So Milton Friedman is one of the most powerful quote machines in the history of capitalism, and yet I feel like his quotes have been like taken to their logical extremes to the point that they've destroyed society as much as Reaganism has. Like the fact that like the only fiduciary duty of the stockholders of a company or whatever, or of a company, is to deliver value to the stockholders. What a fucking blight on our culture. I can't think of a single more poisonous concept than that.
Well, it's destroyed American capitalism. In New York Times in the early 70s, he wrote an article which was very famous, where he talks about, infamous in my opinion, talked about that. He said that any notion of stakeholder capitalism, the notion, which was corporate governance back then when he wrote it, and even before, which is a company to serve the nation, theoretically at least the nation, its workers, employees, the shareholders, the executives, and the communities, and of course the environment, et cetera, et cetera. And he felt that that was the greatest assault on freedom. And let's talk about Milton Friedman, because this is, and I talked about this on American Survival Roku TV years ago, about Milton Friedman and a lot of these libertarian globalist economists and everything. And I'm angling this purposely for conservatives. How many of you know that Milton Friedman was for the, and I'm a stridently insane anti-communist and against National Socialism and fascism. How many of you know that Milton Friedman penned articles opposing the lifting of the grain embargo against the expansionist totalitarian Soviet Union? How many of you know in the 1980s that Milton Friedman was for decontrolling export controls on the Soviet bloc during the 1980s? Why? Because he thought it would improve our trade deficit. How many of you know that Milton Friedman is against energy
neoliberal,
independence?
internationalist, globalist, fucking, yeah, god damn.
Yeah, but all these Tea Party, oh, I hate socialism and communism types. How many of you know that Milton Friedman was for PNTR with Red China, or the lifting of the already then porous embargo on Cuba? I mean, Cuba imports a lot of shit from the West and has been for a long time, including the United States. I mean, he said in China, he said it was kind of like a free country under Deng Xiaoping, like it had more political freedom, personal freedom, or something was increasing under Deng Xiaoping, even though he had massive concentration camps with slave labor and still tight political controls. And all Deng Xiaoping, by the way, did with the economy was rip off Lenin's new economic policy. I mean, just go on LexisNexis, dude, and read the People's Daily and other translated broadcasts and newspaper articles and theoretical journals. Deng Xiaoping ripped it off from Stalin in the 30s with the foreign experts and the technology imports from the West, as well as also Lenin's NEP.
But isn't this kind of like proving the fucking point that like nuance doesn't sell? You know,
No, it doesn't. But
because
I'm
all you
still
can do
peddling.
is, yeah, you can take Friedman's fucking quotes about, stakeholder capitalism or whatever, and basically drag it to the logical conclusion of like, don't worry about externalities, don't worry about the nation, don't worry about the environment, don't worry about whether or not your employees can retire, don't worry about any of that. Just worry whether or not you're able to pay a dividend to your stockholders or whether or not you can increase the stock price.
Oh, here's a little ditty. In congressional hearings in the Buchanan Committee in 1946, Milton Friedman actually was a hired gun for the real estate industry to go to deregulate real estate and rent controls. I know rent controls is controversial. There are pros and cons with it. I get it, but it gives you an idea. I think some of these people are. I think part of it comes down to their ideologues, but the other part, I think they're just very corrupt. I think, to be honest with you, and they're bought.
Well,
I
and I'll take a shot across the bow for somebody who's quite popular, but Destiny, he kind of talks about like, oh well, if you actually look at the whatever what Citizens United or whatever, where
yes,
it's completely deregulated, people can put in as much money as they want. If you actually look at the decisions that are being made by our Congress, et cetera, they actually correlate to the public will relatively well. And on top of that, we don't see the kind of corruption that you would expect. And for me, it's like
yes, he,
you don't
yeah,
know. You don't know because we don't call it corruption anymore. We don't call it whatever the fuck it would be. We don't call it grift. And so as
well,
long
I'd
as
be
the economy
curious.
is humming, then who gives a fuck?
Yeah,
And that's kind of his argument.
yeah, I'm familiar with Destiny's point of view. I mean, I have mixed opinions on his views. I mean, he's definitely not any kind of nationalist. He opposes nationalism vociferously. I know he has defended that when I'm sure you saw the debate he had with Eric Streicher, the
Yeah.
National Socialist. And it's like, oh my God, Destiny, you're like coming out on certain issues worse than the fucking National Socialist would be fucking killer. It's like you're defending fucking stock buybacks and you're in my opinion at least, you're kind of like soft pedaling corruption. I mean, there have been studies like the Benjamin Page and Gillen study from 2014, Eastern University and Princeton University. Dudes that are a lot smarter than Destiny, you and me. And, Destiny's a smart
He's a
guy.
fucking
You're a very
smart cat.
smart
Yeah.
guy, and they talk about this. And there's a correlation where our views are not represented. When you look at the polls issue by issue by issue, we are not represented. Most people want Medicare for all. You have increasing appeal of labor unions, a degree of economic justice. Look, I don't believe in total economic equality. I don't. But give me a break. Just talk to people in the street. I know he lives in South Florida. I know he lives, I think, in the
I was about to
Miami
say you
area.
might be able to throw a rock and hit him. So
Yeah, I mean, he can go and talk to people in Miami that are getting fucked over because of real estate prices and cost of living because the city is fucking unaffordable. It's
well,
because nationally and a state level, we don't, there's no balance anymore. And the funny
well,
thing is on other issues, he's a sock dem in some issues.
so that's my thing that I've been talking to some folks about, including one of my friends who's like master's in business administration, one of the profiters of the K economy. He went to BU and Rollins College and this, that, the other. And I basically told him, it's like, you don't understand how pissed off the fucking working class and middle class is, because the middle class is getting gutted. Like, if you're talking about nurses, cops, firefighters, whatever, they're working 40-hour weeks plus overtime, and their partner still works while they're having kids and families, and they're making ends. Like that's it. They're paying bills, and the only reason why they have any kind of shitty retirement to look forward to is because of state benefits that are under threat. Then,
Mhm.
if you go into the private sector, or like go into teachers, it's even worse. And then, if you go into the private sector, it's a fucking nightmare. Nobody has benefits. No, the benefits are dog shit. You can't even afford to use your health care if you do have it because the deductibles are so high. You can't afford to use you can use your vision and your dental only a couple of times in order to actually use it properly if you're lucky to have those benefits as they are. And then there's basically people who are planning on being Walmart fucking greeters and they're in their 30s or 40s, but because the job prospects and wage prospects are so fucking low, they basically expect to work until they die. And so, like, saying that this is good enough, that, like, yeah, we can just expect everybody to expect to work into their 60s and 70s and that it'll be okay, especially when, like, like Medicare, or not Medicare, what is it, Social Security, it's not insolvent, but it's expected to pay less. So, like, they can make it solvent, but they would have to cut down the benefits. So what the fuck are you expecting people to do? They're hanging by a fucking thread and then they get kicked in the dick while they're hanging by a thread. It's fucking crazy. And so I think when you see, sorry, last part of the rant. I think when you see
No, go ahead, rant all you want. Go
I
ahead.
think when you see the 2020 BLM riots and when you see the when you see January 6th and all that kind of stuff, I think that they can be motivated by the culture war. They can be motivated by BLM. They can be motivated by unjustified police shootings. They can be motivated by all of these social circumstances. But I also think the reason why people are desperate enough to break the law flagrantly in the first place is because they don't have any hope for the future. They legitimately think that they're sliding into shit. And unfortunately, I think they're partially right.
Well, if you don't mind, I don't know if this is good practice. I mean, I do it on my show. It might take a few minutes. I mean, I could read to you scores from my book. I'd have to do like find, and I don't want to like hold up the show. I mean, you read why people are joining Democratic Socialists of America. Why? It's because of exactly what you said. You look at an organization like Light Upon Light, which is now dissolved. You know who Matt Heimbach is, I'm assuming.
I don't, but please tell me.
He was one of the founders and leaders of the TWP, the Traditionalist Workers' Party, as well as people who were organizers for the National Socialist Movement, like Schupp is his last name. You know why they formed these groups? It's not because they got a bug up their ass.
Because they're evil. Yeah, because they're just evil.
Just because of people that are darker skin than us. A lot of it had to do with is because they knew deindustrialization, disinvestment, lack of education improvements, and things of that nature. And you know what they say? Heimbach unfortunately has gone towards national Bolshevism, larded up with racialism, unfortunately. So he kind of went back to, whatever. But, what they said was, you know what? There needs to be policy being made with empathy. And these people need to be heard with empathy. And you got to steal their thunder. That's what fucking FDR did. He wanted to steal the thunder away from what internally was referred to as the crazies, the followers of Father Coughlin, the Communist Party USA, who hated the New Deal at first and secretly, I am convinced, still disliked it because it saved capitalism. The Nazis thought that the New Deal wasn't socialist enough. That's what they said in their press, like Der Angriff and other party newspapers in the Third Reich.
Yeah, they're buying off the poors in order to maintain capitalism. But
exactly.
Which
that's
actually okay, based.
That's what they thought. And again, I'm begging people, especially the people that claim they're against socialism and claim they are against National Socialism and Bolshevism and everything. It's like it happened in Russia. Mark Blythe wrote about in his book Austerity. He's a political economist in one of the universities in Rhode Island. He talks about one of the reasons why the Nazis got a good push is because the Social Democrats put through Tea Party, or I'm sorry to say, I'll call them teabaggers, fuck it, austerity policies that even slash unemployment benefits in the middle of a massive Great Depression. And it's no fucking wonder that the Nazis gained power, and National Socialists as well as the KPD, the German Communists. I mean, again, these policies are saying fuck you to the poor, and just this total lack of empathy and a total disconnect from reality.
Well, I want to.
It's gonna get us all fucking killed.
Well, and that's yeah, that's actually where I want to caution. So there used to be, and by the way, I don't know if you know this, but we're pushing an hour and 45 now. So I wouldn't mind it if you sent me stuff from your book, but I actually want to go over the project that we did this past week with chat, and then probably call it a night because it's been a long week. But I do want to kind of give, I want to respond to what you just said, and then let you kind of give us your final thoughts and outro, and kind of sing it out. But there used to be this concept even in medieval Europe that was called oblige noblesse. I'm not actually saying that like people followed this idea. I'm just saying that it vaguely people appealed to it. And it's the noble obligation. And what it means is that if you're a noble, if you have a little bit of money, a little bit of power, a little bit of clout, whatever, then you have a duty to the peasantry, a duty to the lower classes, a duty to the working class folk in order to take care of them as best as you can within your power and your clout, or else they'll, like, I'm inferring this, or else those people will come and chop your fucking head off, because you can only back people into so much of a corner. And for me, it feels like our elites have been living in such cosmopolitan, transnational, consequence-free fucking luxury for so long that they've forgotten that oblige noblesse exists. And if they piss off enough people too quickly, they'll get their fucking heads chopped off. Now, I don't want that shit to happen at all, but I think what it's going to take is a reorientation to say that healthy families, good jobs, decent education, decent opportunities, the potential to retire, and the ability to maintain your teeth, eyesight, and general health are probably required for fucking poor people to not want to chop your fucking head off. But who the fuck am I, right? But if you wanna shout yourself out, make some final points, and then tell people where to find your book and maybe your Substack when it goes up, and your Twitter and all that kind of stuff, please let the approximately 60 folks know where to find you.
Alrighty, Nevin Gusak. I have a YouTube channel. I now do mostly guest-driven interviews, but I've done some live streams in the past too as well. It's called the Populist Patriot. It's kind of neither left nor right, kind of independent thinker here. I have books on Amazon.com. My latest book, it's a 2-volume series. It's total black-pilled shit. It's really good, really long, but it's really thick with a lot of material. And it's called Turning the Page, My Evolution from Conservatism to Radical Civic Nationalism. I've written other books about, Soviet and Russian and communist politics. I read a lot about trade and economics. And I want to thank you for having me on your show. I really appreciate it. I look forward to hopefully having further discussions in the future. I think people who think like us, I think we have to stick together. I think we have to coordinate. We have to talk with each other, and also engage in different activities, whether it's education, opinion molding, the very good activism and work that you did in the wake of Hurricane Ian. Definitely hats off for that kind of fundraiser. That's great work. I think I've said a lot. I've ranted a lot. And I just want to thank you so much. I'm sorry?
I said it was beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. And you made a lot of wonderful points. And I don't see the chat people, obviously, but thank you, the 60 or so people in chat, for engaging with us and making it seems like some good points. And again, I look forward to being on your show again. And You're more than welcome to come on my show, and we can continue our rants.
Absolutely. No, and it's based, and I know there's only a few dozen of us, but I do want to kind of shift the Overton window this way, because I think, kind of like you were saying, if we let the extremes run the show, then eventually we're just going to destroy ourselves. So let's try to avoid that as much as possible. But it was beautiful hanging out with you. I hope you have a great night, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, catch you, boss.
Thank you. Okay. So
All right, cool. And then I'm going to pull some stuff up. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't dox myself with my Skype. And I'm actually going to show y'all some of the work that we did this week. Even if you've already seen it, I think it's fucking based and deserves a shout out. If you want to do at counterpoints in the chat, I'll answer your questions. You don't have to donate anything, but if you do have some donos, obviously we would appreciate it. And then I'm just going to pull up what we did this week with Operation Hurricane Vosh and just kind of show you what we did, because it was a fucking super based week. So I'm not going to watch the videos unless I think they're pretty cool. So on the end of day one, basically, I'm going to pause this because it's very distracting to me. That's a perfect face to pause on. So on the end of day one, we had chopped up a tree off of a fence. We basically worked with, I'm just going to be fully transparent and share this with y'all. We worked with Central Care Mission of Central Florida. One of the guys that works there is a family member, and they were willing to assist us with some, Hurricane Vosh ? The hurricane's name was Ian, so we nicknamed it Hurricane Vosh, and then we did a fundraiser. So one of the guys that works there is a family member, and they basically said, like, hey, if you swing out, we'll probably have some shit for you to do, and also you can use some of our labor, blah, blah, blah. So the one thing you need to buy was sunscreen, lol, which from your photos you didn't. I applied it once. I applied it once in the morning and then just let it flow. But basically on the first day, we were able to chop up a tree. We were able to get a bunch of fans and pumps into a building in order to salvage it from damage. And basically we weren't able to use all the pumps. That was day one. This was after we bought it. I want to shout out JMac in particular, but also all of our donors. We did get roughly $2,400 in order to take care of this. And here's box fans, an industrial fan, hoses, pumps, all that kind of stuff. So it was awesome. Then that's day 5. Let's find day 2. Where's day 2? Day 2. So this was actually like a really good day. This was probably like our fastest day. So we did a temporary fix for a fence, so a small business could start operating again. We got a tree off of a cable line, and we did $3,000 worth of fence and tree work. So this guy is my fucking favorite. His name is Smooth. He's at the Central Care Mission, and this guy's name is Christian. He was fucking awesome. They helped us out. They used their skills. They were really good. They were previously in construction trades, and basically my friend. Here's me actually digging a post hole. I used a post hole digger for the first time with efficacy because previously I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. Somebody showed me how to use it properly. It's not a complicated technology, but, come on. And then this is my buddy Jake, who works for the Orange County Sheriff's Office. He's a community service liaison. And him and fucking Smooth was like, you got me out here fucking shaking hands with cops and shit. Like, he was talking like a little bit of shit because he's never had a positive relationship with cops. But Jake is one of the nicest guys I know, and he's a community service liaison, so all he does is drive around the community, ask people who got problems, and then help them fix their problems. So he basically found this guy who had a tree down on the Spectrum cable line. This wasn't a power line, and they basically, we had some strong dudes, so they just shoved it off and cut it up. I would say if you hired a professional to do this job and haul the debris, this would probably have been $1,000 job. So we literally saved like $1,000 for the homeowner, got it off of the internet line so people could get their service back faster, all that kind of stuff. Because apparently Spectrum had been out there like 3 or 4 times, just stared at the tree and then walked away because they couldn't get the tree off in order to restore service. So we basically help people get their internet faster as well, which I think is a great community service. On the third day, we had American Guy 96. If you're on Twitter, I would follow this guy. Also hate T-cells. He's local and he goes to school. And basically what they did is they helped me do around like 6 to 7 hours of debris work where a generic American guy, he basically helped me demo a fence early in the morning. We hauled some debris out of the way. And then this gentleman, hate T-cells, showed up later on and basically helped us like load and unload and chainsaw a bunch of trees. This was the first tree that we had done. There's actually more debris over here. But this was the first tree from the first day. So not only did we chop up that tree for that person off of their fence, which was probably like a $1,500 job, but we also actually hauled it to a dump. So pretty sweet to be able to do that. So that's day 3. Let's find day 4. Day 4 was a little lackluster, but I deeply appreciate Generic American Guy because he came out and then we didn't have the Central Care Mission guys that day. So we had like probably a maximum of 8 volunteers. And on our slowest day, we only had 2 volunteers. But Generic American Guy, because we kind of ran out of stuff that we could do by ourselves, he recommended that we do a food run. So we got food for a lady in a trailer park who basically she lost her food stamps because her daughter got a job, so she wasn't able to be on food stamps anymore. And then also because of the hurricane, they lost like a few $100 worth of groceries. So we got $200 worth of canned foods, rice, beans, sauces, and meat. And we basically brought it to them, and then we also brought some to a homeless shelter as well. And then what happened was, we were fucking with chainsaws for so goddamn long. We literally spent like a third of the day fucking fixing chainsaws back and forth. So we literally bought axes in order to chop up the tree, and I'll show you this shit. My house did not get destroyed. It actually did really well. But check this shit out. So... so we had fucking chainsawed this bitch like a good chunk, but the chainsaws kept breaking, so we actually just fucking axed that bitch, and we actually cut a bunch of logs with axes. So it was a fun day, and we this shit's pretty big in person, I'll tell you that. So let me find day 5. Brown rice, gross, hard pass. Dude, if you're fucking starving, you'll eat that shit. So let me show you. Today was actually like a really crazy day. Yeah, it was like an elven tree. It was the toughest tree that I've ever encountered for sure. But look how fucking big this motherfucker is. He's 6 foot tall. That's like 6, 12, 18, 24, 30, 36. This was like a fucking 40, 50 foot tree. It was not small at all. And these branches were like as wide as my hips. And so basically, let me show you what the end result was. So actually, hold on. Let me go back one. So we started with this, basically like a 50 foot tree, 40 to 50 foot tree with these big ass, thick ass limbs. And this is what we ended up with. So we actually hacked this bitch down. I kind of want to go back and show you. So I think I'll show you my friends in a second. But hate T cells, and one of my veteran buddies, he showed up in order to help us. But this pile is fucking huge. It's literally this entire corner of brush and logs. And then what we did was, we're not a professional crew, but we hacked down at all the support branches, and we actually got it all down except for this one big motherfucker, so nobody could get crushed by the tree. And then this is a church. And basically like every dollar that we saved them, I mean, this was probably like a $10,000, $12,000 job, and we probably did like $8K worth of fucking work for them. So that's just $8,000 that church doesn't have to spend. So, I mean, pretty dope ass fucking week, if you ask me. Like, we can do better next time because we do have the pumps and the hoses and all that kind of stuff. We can get out a little bit faster, and we got the fans. So we'll do even better next time. But we probably had like a probably around a $10,000 economic impact where we rendered $10,000 worth of services for free to the community. And basically like I think we did a really good job. And again, like the lowest day was 2 volunteers and the highest day was like 8 volunteers. And normally we had between, we had like 3 to 5. I would say 5 was probably the average. So it was pretty great. Only a couple of dudes from online showed up, but overall we were able to have a really good impact. So I'm pretty excited. So yeah, at Counterpoint's good work. Read horror stories of grifter contractors charging $25K to remove trees. Yeah, because it's supply and demand. So contractors were taking people's money left, right, and center, and finding a contractor to even do it in person was, hardcore, difficult. So Float U32 says, "Oh no, Elven tree destroyed." Indeed, it was the strongest tree that I've ever fucking worked on. It did not want to die. This your first time doing something like disaster relief? Yeah, kind of. Like, I mean, I've done stuff, as a cop, and I've done stuff as in the military. But this was the first time for me doing it as an unpaid volunteer. So we did end up spending our entire budget on either equipment, food for the fellas, or additional equipment that we like, fuel and oil and chainsaw blades and all the stuff that we broke while we were working through the community. Taze Grove says, based as fuck, bud. Proud of you for a week's hard work. Yeah, it was. It was hardcore. And I'm kind of sad that I don't get to go do it tomorrow, but I got to basically rest up and go back to work. But, $2,400 investment from the Twitch politics community, and I think we had like a $10,000 impact, so that's like a 4 times ROI. So I think we did a good job, and we're going to be trying to do these things in the future as well. So the government should regulate that for equity. Lol. Yeah, yeah, there was plenty of things that we were doing that from a liability or insurance perspective were not kosher, but, fuck them. You get what you pay for, and we're free. So I love that you guys hung out with me, that we had a good time, all that kind of stuff. I can't raid on YouTube, and I'm sorry to dip out early, but I am exhausted, dude. I literally did like a week's worth of work. So if y'all, okay, let me tell you what you can expect, though, before we dip out. So number one, I'll obviously get you guys like another interrogator episode this week. There should be a Hammer and Bolter episode coming out soon, because basically I think we're on the 3rd week. So there should be a Hammer and Bolter episode either coming out this week or next week. So we'll shoot it as soon as it comes out and get it out to you guys, because there's a lot of people who like the Hammer and Bolter series. When it comes to politics, I got a few essays up here. We already released the Why I'm Right-Wing episode. I think I'm going to do one. It's like, why I'm palling around with the far right. Like, why am I hanging out with Nick Fuentes? Why am I hanging out with Lauren Southern? All that kind of stuff, and then kind of highlight our worldview differences. And then we can just keep, expanding on the political series, because there are a few thousand people who will watch the political video essays, even though the Warhammer stuff obviously does better. But I appreciate you. Normally we get like 50 to 150 people hanging out, so I appreciate the roughly 50 people who are hanging out with us right now. And then I'll get the Twitch people rated over to somebody, and then the YouTube people, unfortunately, are just going to have to suffer, because it is what it is. But I love you guys, so I appreciate y'all hanging out. I appreciate you having a good time. I appreciate the Raiders hanging out with us as well. I think we're around 13, and another like 10 or 15 of y'all hung out with us while we were doing our thing. So I appreciate the Raiders hanging out. And yeah, obviously follow, like, share, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. I'm gonna send you to Tiberius D. Looks like he's on a panel fighting people, so enjoy the panel shit show. And yeah, I hope you Twitchers have a beautiful night. I'll talk to the YouTube people, and then I'll get the fuck out of here. All right, that is rated. Yeah, get that spaghetti. Spaghetti's the shit. This is what socialism does to a motherfucker. Russian programmer at work wrote some code the other day which talked about axes, and it wouldn't work. She meant axis. Lol. Nice. Yes, make a fire. True. This is your first time? Yes, based as fuck. Government should do that. You probably heard of Bo, the fifth column. He was down there recently and has some good vids and experiences. This is a Twitch comment, unfortunately. But yeah, Bo has some shady stuff in his past, but I think he's overall a good dude. Continue to influence Lauren Southern like Destiny. Hopefully Canadians learn. Probably not, but we'll do our best. I like hanging with wacky libs sometimes. They're kooky. True. Canada is not sending their best for sure. Indeed. We should ask the CQ, the Canadian question. But to the roughly 50 to 60 people who hung out with us, it was a beautiful night. I appreciate you guys for doing it. I'm going to go the fuck to sleep, and you should as well. Have a beautiful night. Catch you soon.